Hello friends, and welcome back to another episode from Annie's Arms. In today's video, we're going to discuss how I lubricate my SP5 with grease, and I'll also show you how I lubricate some of the harder parts within a pistol. I published this video last night, and after a couple hours of thinking about it, I thought I could do a better job. So in complete disclosure, this morning I'm currently on take 6, and we're going to see if I can get it right this time. What I'm going to try to focus on in this video that I felt like I did a bad job in the first video is more on the why behind it and not just the how-to. So the first thing you might be asking yourself is, why am I even lubricating with grease? The high-level answer is because of this chart called the Strybeck curve. The Strybeck curve defines the three layers the three types of lubrication that we can have: boundary lubrication, mixed lubrication, and hydrodynamic lubrication. The reason I'm using grease is because the base oil in this grease is of a higher viscosity, and the higher the viscosity is, the more you're hedging that you're going to be in hydrodynamic lubrication and not boundary lubrication. I'll discuss a little more about the chemistry and the why of this grease and other greases when I do my video specifically on how to lubricate like an engineer, where I discuss greases. The other benefit that I found, because I've been using this grease for a little over a year and a half, is I find that my firearms are easier to clean. I lubricate with grease, I clean with odorless mineral spirits, and I have found that the guns clean faster, more effectively, and just better with that combination. So in this video, we're starting with a clean, dry gun. So I've cleaned it with odorless mineral spirits many times now, and I wipe everything down with just a blue shop rag when I'm done to remove any of the solvents or any of the odorless mineral spirits that haven't already evaporated. So we're going to begin with, you use a 2x2 or a 3x3 patch, whatever you have at your convenience. Again, I apologize, but I'm on take 6 of this, and so this patch has been saturated a couple times now. So on a fresh patch, you would need a larger glob than that, but because I've used this patch a couple times already, it doesn't take much grease to make sure that we're fully saturated. So we're going to work the grease into the patch. And then I'm going to begin with the bolt carrier. And on the bolt carrier, I'm going to begin with the rails. The reason I'm starting with the rails is because on this fresh patch, I want the thickest layer, the thickest coating of grease to be on the rails, because that is where, or that is how, our bolt is moving in the receiver of the firearm. And as it moves, I want that little thicker layer on the rails so that it can find, so the lubricant can find the high spots and the low spots and settle into where it wants to be. On the rest of the bolt, we're just going to rub the patch over, because we're really relying on more of the protectant aspect of the grease so that our parts don't rust. And the lubricant comes in handy if it does make slight contact with the sides of the receiver. So on my webpage where I sell the grease, I have a little longer written up explanation of the why behind this grease. But it is an industrial grease, and its formulation is really quite wonderful for the application of a firearm. Its formulation is not the typical formulation that you would see in an industrial grease that you would buy at AutoZone or any of your local hardware stores. It's got wonderful rust and corrosion protection. as well as wonderful lubrication and high pressure aspects of the grease as well. The next spot we're going to move to is the inside of the receiver. We're going to start with the rails, and just like we started with the bolt, we're going to put a little dollop of fresh grease onto our patch, and we're going to work it around. Starting to get some strings coming off of my patch. The other nice thing to note, most people think about grease as being a very messy application, and I'm still fairly clean. I always use gloves when I'm handling firearms and lubricants, because I know I've been exposed to a lot of stuff just from normal life. So anytime I can cut down on a little bit of exposure, I'm going to. So gloves are a pretty easy first step. So we're going to start with the rails, like we started with the rails on our bolt carrier. For the same reasoning, the German engineering is wonderful, but any of the high spots or low spots in the stamped sheet metal, we want to make sure we have a little thicker layer of grease on those parts, so that as the bolt reciprocates, we're going to move that layer of lubricant around, and it'll help find the highs and the lows and try to make sure we stay in that hydrodynamic lubrication during all of the operation. I'm now going to open the patch back up and get to the top part of the receiver, or the bottom part in this view, and make sure we get some grease in there. Here, again, like the top surface of the bolt carrier, we're really relying on the grease to be more of a protectant than we are a lubricant, because the bolt's not really making contact with the upper receiver. We just want to keep it protected. So then what I'll do is open up my patch, and I'm going to go inside the trunnion and lubricate that area. I'm just touching where the rollers are making contact and locking into place in the trunnion. I am avoiding the face of the barrel. So I'm not sure how well it's going to pick it up on camera, even on take 6. But you can see we've got a nice sheen in the receiver, and you don't see any globs of grease like you would on a wheel bearing, because we're not lubricating this like a wheel bearing. We're just trying to get a nice, even, thin coat of grease on the inside of the firearm. One of the other misnomers about grease is that you have to lay it on thick. Again, that comes from the industrial application of pivot pins on excavators and bulldozers. And part of what you're doing with that when you get it to squeeze out of those pins is you're using the grease as an additional shield to make sure dust, dirt, and debris don't get inside those pins. But what a lot of people don't understand is the matrix of the grease, how it's made up. The sponge is another way that people think about the matrix of the grease, is quite small. And so here we've got page 60 of the NLGI Grease Guide. And this is the actual microstructure of many different types of greases. We've got a lithium 12-hydroxystearate, we've got a calcium complex, aluminum complex, another lithium complex, a diurea, and we can see how that matrix actually looks. I don't know if you can see it, but most of the scales here are between 1 and 2 micrometers. And the matrix, so that sponge of the grease, is smaller than the scale by many orders of magnitude. So here in this one, because I think you can maybe see it the best, our scale is 2 micrometers, and you can see the fibrous structure. 2 micrometers is equal to 7/100,000ths of an inch. So that's .00007 of an inch. Most of the tolerances inside firearms are going to be in the thousandths to 10,000ths. So the microstructure of the grease is many orders of magnitude smaller than the clearances that we have between the parts. So again, you don't have to lubricate a firearm like a wheel bearing. We just need a thin sheet or a thin coating, and that thin coating is more than enough to have the microstructure, the makeup of the grease, as well as have that base oil. So now that we've lubricated the inside of the receiver, the outside of our bolt carrier, we'll move on to the other parts. And again, since these are kind of the more sensitive parts, we'll call it the closer fitting parts, we're not going to re-grease our patch. We're just going to use the impregnated patch and rub it over it. Let's see if I can get a little better picture. So there you can see we've got just a nice thin coating of that grease on there to keep our part lubricated and protected. In one of the takes of this video, I forgot to lubricate and protect the spring and the firing pin. Again, here, we're worried a little less about the actual lubrication, but we are trying to make sure we get that grease structure onto the parts to keep them protected. So now we're going to go ahead and do the bolt head. The inside of the bolt and the inside there of the bolt carrier can be a little tricky. So what we do there, I still have enough Q-tips, I don't have to reuse Q-tips yet, is we're going to take our grease, we're going to put a little dollop on there, and then just as we did the patch, we're going to work that grease and impregnate that Q-tip with it. So now take the Q-tip and just rub it around in there to make sure everything's nice and coated. What I do, well, before I forget, we'll go ahead and move on to the bolt carrier. So again, same principle, just rubbing it around. We don't want a thick layer, we just want enough of a layer to provide that protection aspect of the lubricant. To make sure the rollers are fully lubricated, I'll take my patch and kind of use that to help turn it, and I'll use the locking piece to pop the roller back out. So there you can see, fully lubricated, no globs, nothing. It's not overly greased. It's not a wheel bearing. I know I keep referring to that, but there is a person here on YouTube that has lubricated a firearm like a wheel bearing, and that's just not the way to do it, because the grease doesn't need to be applied that thick. So now that we've got everything lubricated, we've got our bolt carrier, firing pin, spring, locking piece, bolt head, the inside of the receiver, we would go back to reassembly now. So at this point, everything's good to go. If you purchase my grease kit on the website it comes with a syringe. The syringe is handy when you're trying to do like the rails of a pistol, or some firearms are a little harder to reach some of the lubrication points. So I include the syringe because, again, the goal is to lubricate our firearms well and not make a mess. You can do 2 dabs, 3 dabs, 5 dabs, whatever your heart desires. I then take a clean Q-tip, and those dabs I then rub along the rails, the inside of the rail. Now that I've distributed the grease in the rail, I think you can see that we've got some globs of grease in some places. I then take the other side of the Q-tip and I use that to kind of wipe up those globs of grease. And again, it's hard to see in the video, but when you do this on your firearm, you'll see that there is still a nice thin coating of oil or grease on the inside of that rail, but it's not overly messy or dirty or gross. And when we slide it back onto the firearm, you might get a little buildup on the edges, but you rack the slide 2-3 times, wipe off the excess, and you're not going to get it to keep coming out the edges. So thanks again for watching. Please stay tuned for my next videos where I have some focused talks on the chemistry and formulation of different greases and oils and how they apply to our firearms. See you later. Bye.